Hey everyone, welcome back to our series on arguments, the part 2 series on arguments. Here at the beginning, I just want to remind you, we have a mentor text for this series. I'm going to be referring to it. It is Ta-Nehisi Coates' essay from The Atlantic. Civil rights protests have never been popular. It is linked down below. If you have not read it, you should read it. It's going to make some of the things that I say in this episode make a lot more sense. Theme song. So far we've covered my 3 rules, and then we covered my 4th rule. And today we're going to talk about making concessions or including counter arguments, or as they call it in They Say, I Say, a book I highly recommend. Again, I highly recommend for high school students, planting a naysayer in your text. So why do you want to give the other side airtime if you're writing an argument? If you're trying to change people's minds about something, if you're trying to change the way people act, the things that they believe, why even bring up the other side? 2 reasons. Number 1, it improves your credibility. As I talked about in the previous episode, you are not the first. Other people have written about your topic, other people have agreed with you, and other people have disagreed with you. So the fact that you are able to include some of that disagreement without fear, that lends some credibility to your position as an author. And the other thing is that very often when you mention what the other side says, it's a perfect launching pad into what you believe instead, or why the other side is wrong. Often when we talk about the concession or the counter argument, we actually pair it with a word like refutation or response, so that you're not just dropping in a paragraph of, well, here's what the other side says, but you're actually saying, the other side says this, and let me explain why that isn't enough, or why that's inaccurate, or why my position is better. In fact, Ta-Nehisi Coates, he not only uses the other side's opinions in his text, civil rights protests have never been popular, but he actually uses the launching pad metaphor. When he's talking about David Leonhardt, he says, you know what, this guy's argument was doomed because the launching pad it was lifted off from was just wrong. So 2 good reasons to include the concession or the counter argument. So how do you find the other side? How do you know where to look for the counter argument, or for something that you can concede in a concession? Like, where does this exist? It'd be really nice if I could just say, oh, you know what, there's a warehouse downtown, you just walk down there, you pick it up, everybody can get one. That's not the way it is. In fact, I'm going to have to go back to my first rule of audiences, which is know your audience. If you are watching this, you are probably a high school student, and you are probably being assigned argument essays or persuasive essays or something like that, and you're looking for some help in putting them together. So let's talk about that class essay. The number 1 thing that you can do in terms of finding a naysayer, finding the other side for an essay in class, is to go to the teacher and say, hey, I'm kind of leaning towards X as my claim, but I would like to know more about the people who say Y. Do you have some resources? Can you point me in a particular direction? And a good teacher will help you. You can also go to your classmates, particularly if you've all got a very similar assignment. You can say, oh, hey, classmate, I was thinking of saying yes to this question. Are you maybe thinking about no? Can we talk about why no is also a valid reason? So you use your classmates as assistants. You can also go to the interwebs. You can pull up the Wikipedia. Don't do the Wikipedia part, but scroll down to the bottom where they list the sources. Pop open some of those original sources and start digging through those. You can also pull up a website like procon.org. I'm going to link that below, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's here's all of the hot button issues of the day, and people who think this way about it, and people who think that way about it. You can take a look and see what the people who agree with you and disagree with you have to say. Remember, if you're getting information from outside sources, you need to be citing it properly. You can also go to another good resource is the New York Times website. I'll link this below, but they have a list of 1,000 different writing prompts. Now, not all of them are argument prompts, but a lot of them are. I think like 600 of them are, and they're arranged in categories by topic, and they have links to original texts that appeared in the New York Times. And then, those people, you go and read that op-ed, it's probably going to link to something somebody else said, and you can end up down a rabbit hole, but you can also sort of begin to understand what the other side might think. Or not. Maybe the counter argument just comes from your brain the same way the argument did. Here's what you can do. You can write your thing, write your argument, all your evidence, the best logical structure that you could come up with, set it aside. Give it a day, give it 2 days. Obviously, if you have a time writing in class, this doesn't work. But if a teacher says, hey, this is due at the end of the week, this is due on Monday, set aside your best argument. Come back to it fresh and imagine that you are not the one who wrote this. You are reading this for the first time and you hate these people, the ones who think like this. Look for the holes in the logic. Look for evidence that might be misinterpreted. Look for places where there's a completely separate set of valid reasoning that could lead to a different conclusion. Look for, if you check my close reading playlist, I've got one in there called SUMOS, where what are the outcomes? If we listen to this idiot who wrote this paper, what would be the final outcome? What are all the implications of listening to this guy? Can I say something that indicates that those are bad, or that we want to try to stop this? So basically, when you are inventing a naysayer, and you can do this, you are putting yourself into someone else's shoes. And I'll give you, we'll talk about Colin Kaepernick and the anthem protests, because that's what Ta-Nehisi Coates was writing about. So you put yourself into Kaepernick's shoes, if that's appropriate. Put yourself into Kaepernick's teammates' shoes, or a veteran's shoes, or even an NFL owner's shoes. How would they look at this situation? How would they look at this argument that you have actually written? And how would they come back against it? So finally, how do we integrate the naysayers into our own text? I'm going to give you 3 choices. And number 1, by far the easiest, most often taught, most often recommended, to put it at the end. When teachers teach you the 5-paragraph essay, which I hate and I wish they would stop teaching, they will often say, introduction, body paragraph of evidence and reasons, body paragraph of evidence and reasons, body paragraph that is what the other side says and why they're wrong, conclusion. So putting the naysayer, putting the counter argument at the end is probably something that's very familiar to you. It's something that you have done before. In fact, I will very often tell students that you can use the naysayer or the counter argument as the first sentence of your conclusion, which is a much more interesting thing to do than making it its own separate paragraph. Because in your conclusion, then you can include a call to action. And so the way it ends up being structured is that although X believes blah, 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 I still maintain blah, blah, blah because blah, blah, blah. It's a really nice structure where you get the other side in there, but you also get the refutation or the response in there. And if you were paying attention a couple of episodes ago, it is an opportunity for you to restate your claim. Restating your claim at the end in a slightly different way is a baller move. You should do that more often. Then you lead right into your call to action. And because I am right about blah, 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 we should all blah, 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 blah. Another idea is Brian Stevenson's way of dealing with the counter-arguments or the concessions of the naysayers. He integrates those all throughout the body of his text. So when you're reading Brian Stevenson's A Presumption of Guilt, it was the mentor text for Series 1 of Arguments if you aren't paying attention or haven't read it yet. But when you read that, what you find is that his own detailing of the history and what is going on and his own evidence is punctuated with evidence from the people who were on the other side. It's about the criminal justice system and the history of that in America, particularly related to African American men. And so he will quote the Southern governor who believes in lynching. He will quote the newspaper editorial that says, "Oh, let us have our lynching." He will quote or bring in the Supreme Court of the United States that said, we had better make capital punishment legal because if we don't, people are going to be lynching. So those counter arguments and concessions are woven through. And what Stevenson does, I think in a really nice way, is for each one of those, he provides evidence as to why that opinion is completely misguided and why that opinion is part of the reason we're in the mess that we are today. A third way to bring the naysayer, to bring the counter-argument into your text, start with it. This is what Ta-Nehisi Coates does in Civil Rights Protests Have Never Been Popular. He literally opens with one common response to the Colin Kaepernick protests have been blah, blah, blah. And then he actually quotes a couple of people who have taken the other position. So this might be something that you would consider doing. You put in what the other side is saying, and then you get into your own evidence, as Coates does, why that other side is wrong. This is a little risky. It is a little daring, and it's not something that is necessarily the easiest to do, unless your teacher has specifically provided you with something that you need to respond to. If your teacher's asking you to read a thing and then you're agreeing or disagreeing or you're taking your own approach, that thing might be the opening of your essay. And I want to be very careful and cautionary here when I say this. I don't mean you copy the question into your first paragraph or you paraphrase that question into a statement in your first paragraph. That's kind of dumb. Don't do that. But I am saying that, like, I'll give you an example. There was an AP language prompt about Oscar Wilde, where Oscar Wilde is talking about how the only social progress that has ever happened comes through disobedience and rebellion. If you disagreed with him, you could go ahead and put Wilde's words right there at the beginning. If you agree with him, there's not much sense in doing that. So putting the other side, putting the naysayer at the beginning is tricky, it's hard, but when it works, like it did for Ta-Nehisi Coates, it's pretty amazing. And that's it, making the concession. It adds to your credibility. It gives you a jumping off point to say something that you want to say about it. You may have to do some digging to find the other side, or you may have to put yourself in someone else's shoes in order to think of the other side. And finally, you can put it at the end. Not difficult. You can weave it in and out through the middle. This is particularly true if you have a lot that you're trying to say and it's a long piece, or you can put it right at the beginning like Ta-Nehisi Coates does to basically launch into his own argument where his claim comes at the very end. And speaking of claims coming at the very end, the next episode is about this thing I like to call the inductive argument, where you essentially lead your reader from a set of possibilities through evidence to a single undeniable conclusion. Your claim goes at the end. Coates does this, and you can do this too. But I'll talk about it when I see you for the next one. That thing I said before? Nope, I didn't say that thing before.